Recording is started. So as Kelly mentioned, my name is Rima Atung. I am the grant coordinator or primary contact for this project at the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission, which we refer to as CJC. So thank you so much for joining us today on this webinar on the Vulnerable Adult Multidisciplinary Teams, or VAMDT or MDT. We call it all those things. So you probably will hear me referring to any of those acronyms. So let's go ahead and get started. I just want to do some housekeeping at the front. As I mentioned, we are recording today, and this recording will be posted to the CJC's YouTube channel. So it's available to anyone who wasn't able to attend, and also to anyone in your office that you feel may benefit from this information. Please feel free to share it. We'll send out copies of the presentation as well with that link. Just for purposes of everything going smoothly, please stay on mute and refrain from using the Teams chat. That being said, if you do have a question at any point, we're going through some, statutory requirements. It's pretty dry. If you have questions about any of it, please use the hand raise function on Teams if you can, just so I know that you have a question and can kind of organize things and make sure everything's answered. And you can raise your hand at any point, and we'll try to get to those questions. As Kelly mentioned, there'll also be a question and answer time at the end of the presentation as well. So let's go ahead and jump in. So here's the agenda introduction. We've kind of already done. Our contact points are me, Kelly, and then Chris at the DOJ. Next, we're going to go through just an overview of ORS 430-739, its history and requirements, including the reporting requirements. And then we're going to walk through the reporting process, take a quick look at the form that you folks should use to fill in the data that we need from you. And as I mentioned, we'll have time for some more questions at the end. So just real quick, the Criminal Justice Commission, for anyone who isn't familiar, is a Salem-based agency. The commission that is tasked with making decisions such as updates to the sentencing grid and grant awards administered through our office consists of a 7-member body of appointed commissioners. The list of commissioners is on our website that I included below with their bios if you're interested to learn more. It's a little confusing because to support that commission, there's about a 30-person administering agency that also has the same name. So I know that can be confusing. And I am part of that supporting agency. We do the day-to-day administrative handling of things, such as the grant administration and the data collection. Our role also includes research projects, policy groups. Some of the grants that we administer for Oregon's criminal legal system are like those new behavioral health grants that were created with the revisions and repeal of the Measure 110 statutes. So that's a big project that is coming out of our office right now. Another one is a grant that I administer, the Illegal Marijuana Market Enforcement Grant, which provides funds to combat large-scale illegal marijuana growth. So we just kind of do a whole bunch of different grants with different subject matter related to the legal system in Oregon. Our statutory purpose is to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of state and local criminal justice systems by providing centralized and impartial forum for statewide policy development and planning. That's a mouthful that basically means that we do a lot of research, and we are the data clearinghouse for a lot of criminal justice system data in Oregon. And we are also kind of a nonpartisan agency that gets snuck into a lot of bills and projects for the state, such as this one, in which we just collect data. So that's just a little bit of background about the agency. So now we're going to jump into our topic for today, which is the Vulnerable Adult Multidisciplinary Team History. So hopefully you're familiar with some of this, but just so we're all on the same page, let's just do a brief review. The vulnerable adult MDTs were enacted in 2009 through House Bill 2442. This was an omnibus bill aimed at addressing and preventing abuse of vulnerable adults. It required the creation of these multidisciplinary teams organized by district attorney or a delegate, and that's pursuant to written agreement in every county in Oregon. The purpose of these teams was to collaboratively address reports of abuse of vulnerable adults across all the different human services and public safety systems. So, the goal was really to address some historical issues of low investigation rates and prosecution that were noted at that time in 2009, and to bring all those players together onto the same team to provide more comprehensive approach to those investigations for vulnerable adults. So in support of that goal, the following requirements were established in statute through ORS 430-739. So overall, there's 7 requirements of counties, and we're just going to talk through each one kind of briefly, and then we'll go in detail in a couple more of them. So the first is that the district attorney in each county, or a delegate, as I mentioned before, that's established through written agreement, shall develop a multidisciplinary team for that county. There's actually requirements in the statute that identifies who else should be on that team, and that's including but not limited to personnel from community mental health, community developmental disabilities, Department of Human Services, Oregon Health Authority, the local local area agency on aging, district attorney's office, law enforcement, advocates for disabilities, or others specially trained in abuse of adults. So it can really encompass a lot of different folks. And as I mentioned, it's all identified in the statute, and that is included in that link for ORS 430-739 if you need more information on that. The second statutory requirement is that teams shall develop written protocols for immediate investigation and notification procedures in cases of abuse of adults and interviewing victims. The section also requires written agreements from team member agencies that specify the roles and procedures following for assessing risks to vulnerable adults and guidelines for communication. We're going to look at that in more detail in a bit. I also want to note here that, Kelly and Chris have some great examples of written protocols that counties have drafted, and I'm sure they would be happy to share those with you if you haven't developed your own protocols yet, or if you just want to look at other counties' protocols to compare with your own. And I'm just kind of steamrolling through this, so if at any point I'm going too fast or if you have questions, please just throw up a hand and let me know. The third requirement is that teams shall have access to training in risk assessment, dynamics of abuse of adults, legally sound interview and investigatory techniques. And again, just to throw it out there, Kelly mentioned the conference. Hopefully you folks have attended before in October. There's going to be another one. I went last year. It was fantastic and full of really useful information. So I highly recommend it. The fourth requirement is that all investigations shall be carried out consistent with written protocols and procedures required by the previous subsection. And the fifth is that all information obtained by these multidisciplinary team members in exercise of duties is confidential. Two requirements that are very relevant to our conversation today is requirement 6, which is that teams shall develop and implement procedures for evaluating and reporting compliance of member agencies with these protocols and procedures. So hopefully your procedures include, that evaluation and reporting piece. And then also there are specific data points that need to be reported by July 1st of every year to the CJC and DOJ. And the CJC, or myself in this instance, serves as the point for collecting all of that data. So we want to look a little bit more closely at those last two, the written protocols and notification procedures, and then we'll go a little bit more in detail with the data reporting requirements. So as mentioned, the multidisciplinary teams must have protocols for the investigation, notification procedures for cases of abuse of adults, and interviewing with victims. And specifically, those written agreements signed by all the member agencies need to specify the role of each agency, procedures to be followed to assess risks to the adult, guidelines for timely communication between the different member agencies, and guidelines for completion of responsibilities by the different member agencies. So those are the specific requirements. And again, more detail can be found in that ORS 43739. I'm just going to pause for a second. Does anyone have any comments or questions at this time? Nope. All right. I don't see any hands raised. So I'm going to go ahead and continue. Oh, actually, I did see a hand raised.
Good morning. My name is Sherry, and I work in Josephine County. There's been some confusion in the past, and seeing the stuff here that that you're talking about, where there's protocols set up by the VA MDTs.
Yep.
My understanding of a VA MDT, first of all, I know, like you said earlier, that it is the responsibility of the district attorney's offices in each county. They are responsible for the MDT meetings. For my county, I am the one that facilitates the meeting. In Jackson County, my coworker facilitates the meeting, but I'm a little bit confused because you're talking about setting all these protocols and guidelines for VA MDT, but wouldn't, like, APS has its own protocols. I'm sure the police department has their own protocols, DA and everything. So I'm confused as to what protocols specifically for an MDT meeting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and perhaps Kelly can jump in a little bit more, but I think there are specific things on how the MDT functions, how the different member agencies are supposed to work together and communicate with each other that are kind of separate from each agency's specific responsibilities and protocols internally. So I think the statute here is really more focused on how that communication and collaboration across agencies works.
That's a good explanation of it, Rima. So Sherry, when we can have further discussion about this later on if you'd like to, but in part the reason for these is also to get stakeholders to make a commitment to the team, and make a commitment to staffing cases and to following the rules of privacy in these when we do these reviews, and then also establishing, just like I said, some of these privacy and security issues, because we want to protect the people that we are discussing in this setting. So, if you have any questions, I can send you a copy. We have some really great examples from some other counties who have some really robust guidelines. And usually to be honest, all they are is just ripped off usually from the child abuse MDTs, because those came prior to vulnerable adult MDTs, and they have a lot of the same procedures that they use as what we used for the vulnerable adult MDTs. But I guarantee it's a really great thing to have, because especially, just kind of getting police agencies, I think that's probably one of our hardest cells is to get police agencies to commit to coming to these meetings and staffing cases and being involved in the process. They, their brass has to actually sign and commit, to attending the meetings and being an active participant in the meetings. So it's just kind of a way just to hold people accountable too.
Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else at this point? Okay, I don't see any other hands raised. And thanks again for doing that. It's really helpful when I'm just trying to read through the presentation to, to see that raised hand. Okay, so now we're on the annual data reporting requirements. And we want to look a little bit more in detail at those because that's sort of the purpose and obligation annually that teams have to the state. So to start, let's just read through the 6 data points that are required. No later than July 1st of each year, the multidisciplinary teams are tasked with reporting substantiated allegations of abuse of adults in the county for the preceding calendar year. So at this point in time, we would be asking for substantiated allegations for the year of 2023. So calendar year of 2023 is what the current reporting encompasses. The next data point is substantiated allegations of abuse referred to law enforcement because there was reasonable cause found that a crime had been committed. The third is allegations of abuse that were not investigated by law enforcement. And then allegations of abuse that led to criminal charges, allegations that led to prosecution, and then allegations of abuse that led to conviction. As I'm sure you can kind of see by looking at this list, these data points sound very concrete and specific, but folks on these teams come from a variety of different agencies with different data systems. It can be a little bit tricky to coordinate the collection of that data and figure out exactly what that means. And I think that's where those protocols come into play. And on the next slide here, we're going to look at some of the sources that can be used for those specific data points. So for the first 2, the substantiated allegations of abuse for the preceding calendar year, the substantiated allegations that referred to law enforcement because there was reasonable cause, and the allegations of abuse that were not investigated. What we've come to over the past few years is pulling that data directly from Adult Protective Services, since they're sort of the reporting agency for those allegations. So currently, we get those 3 data points from Adult Protective Services or from OTIS, Office of Training and Investigative Services, for the adults with developmental disabilities portion of the population. So that's where we get those top 3 data points. The 3 that the counties have been responsible for the past few years is really these bottom 3 here. The allegations of abuse that led to criminal charges, allegations of abuse that led to prosecution, and then the allegations of abuse that led to conviction. So those are what is reported by each individual county to our office each year on our data reporting form. So those are usually pulled from, the district attorney's office or some internal collection system that you guys come up with for your multidisciplinary team. Are there any questions or comments on those data points? Okay, I see Owen has a question.
Yeah, my question is how prosecution is defined as opposed to just filing criminal charges.
Great question. And I think that's, as I said, it's a little tricky because there's no definitions with those different data points. So they're open to interpretation. I think folks might even interpret them differently. And that's something that's kind of defined in the team's protocols. But again, Kelly, if you have any additional information, feel free to jump in. A lot of times, people pull those things that led to prosecution as from the case system at the district attorney's office. So those are things that have actually made it that far. And I'm not saying that very articulately, so I apologize.
No, I mean, yeah, I think, and if a case is initiated, opened by the prosecutor's office, the DA's office, and there is action taken. So if we're going to grand jury, or if, there is an indictment, those are all actions taken towards prosecution that would be included in a statistic.
I guess my question then is how that differs from then how you're defining criminal charges, because typically, going to grand jury, that would be when criminal charges are actually filed. So, and so in that respect, then it seems like if we're just defining leading to prosecution as meaning we've gone to grand jury and to get the criminal charges, that would be the same universe as D.
I would agree with you, to be quite honest. So, unfortunately, we all know that sometimes when these statutes get crafted, it's not always the people who might implement them, or they might have interpreted. So the lawmakers might have had an idea for what that meant specifically, but we have been unable to delineate really the difference between.
Yeah.
So I would just assume, Rima, if I'm getting this wrong, let me know. I would assume, you'd have the same stat for D as you would for E.
Sometimes we see a difference. So, people in D might report, like you said, anything where an action has been taken. And then in E, sometimes cases fall off because like they can't find a witness, or they're non-cooperative, or something happens to that case during that prosecution process before conviction, or before the case has been resolved. So I think.
Yeah, and I just thought of a circumstance. So I have one, just a case. So officer ends up arresting a suspect for criminal mistreatment, and then upon PC, review, they dismiss the charges, and so it never got filed through the prosecutor's office. So that could be an example of, if we have law enforcement makes the arrest, but then it doesn't actually make it towards prosecution. That could be an example of that. I think that's it doesn't happen as often or as frequently, but it could happen.
Yeah, and just to note too, our form, as you'll see in a second, includes space at the bottom to kind of, or actually a space after each of these 3 data points to add some narrative information. So a lot of times folks will, the prompt is specifically, if you're reporting 0 for this, please give it a description why, but people put in all kinds of information. So if you have anything specific to how you're reporting those data points, please feel free to include that. And we'd make note of it and try and follow up where needed. Another excellent question. Thank you. Is there anything else that folks are curious or confused about at this point? No. All right. So we'll go ahead and move on. So just some additional things to think about of what you can do prior to this July 1st deadline. Just, identify who manages the source of each data point, which member agency is responsible for that data point, develop a timeline for when that data is going to get supplied, and then decide who is going to actually submit that data. As I mentioned, feel free to flag any reporting gaps or issues. And at the bottom here is this reminder, we really would like you to submit a report, even if you have 0 cases to report, even if you don't have an active team at this point in your county. Just getting a response with that information is super, super helpful, since we do have this reporting requirement of everyone to report by July 1st. Giving us any information is reporting. So please, please let us know what your circumstance is, or send us the data report by this deadline of July 1st. And then here is a look at what the actual form looks like. It's super simple. Again, just 3 data points, just your county, the reporting person, and then it goes through each of the data points. And like I mentioned, has this little section for the narrative. It's an Excel form that we emailed out. Please contact me if you're the person, or somebody else in your office is the person to report and you don't have this form. I'm happy to share it with you. And then that's just an Excel form that gets emailed as an attachment. And then you'll be done with your reporting. And then we take all this information and compile it and do some statistics with it, as Kelly mentioned. And I included here on this contact slide a link to the report for last year. Again, it's for the previous calendar year. So the report that we completed, in the summer of 2023 was for 2022 data. The report that we're going to complete this year is going to be for 2023 data. That's why it looks like it's behind by 2 years. But if folks are curious about, what we do with all the data, or just to see how your statistics kind of compare with each county, please look at that report. It just takes all of the information, separates it out by county. There's a little bit more on the adult probation side, because they have a database where they're inputting data on each of the allegations, so we can sort it out by type and that kind of thing. And it might be kind of interesting for you to see how your county relates to other counties. Here's our contact information. Again, please feel free to reach out by phone or email. Email is a little bit better, just because I like to have written records, make sure I respond to everything for me. And then there's Chris and Kelly's information as well. That's pretty much it. So are there any other questions or points of discussion that folks have at this point? I'm not seeing any additional hands. Yeah, so I guess, again, thank you so much for sitting through this kind of dry topic with me. I've been privileged enough to attend some of the MDTs for the counties, and it's just fantastic to see them in action. And I feel very privileged to be a part of this process and to be, the person that's collecting this data. So thank you for that, and thank you for all of your cooperation. And just feel free to reach out at any point. Like I said, the recording is going to be on our YouTube channel. We'll send out the link to that with the copy of the slides. And I look forward to communicating with you guys all in the future. And if there's nothing else, we can go ahead and get a half an hour back for your day.
Thank you for your time.